All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. I'm going to be talking to you about ADHD friendly communication today, and it's a bite-sized introduction. Obviously, we can only skim the surface of this rich and varied topic, but I'm also going to signpost you to further resources that will allow you to dive deeper into this if you're interested. So, briefly, a little bit about me. I'm an inclusive and accessible communication educator, which means that I teach people inclusive language and accessibility. And there's a photo of me on screen. I'm a white person with light brown hair, smiling into the camera, as I am today here, because I'm delighted to be with you all. So, what is ADHD? And I would love if you could pop in the chat, if that's available to you, what you think ADHD is. Don't worry about technical definitions. I'm looking for what comes to mind when I say ADHD. What words spring into your mind? What do you associate with this idea, ADHD? And I'll just give a moment, see what's coming through. Distraction, forgetfulness, impulsivity, procrastination, executive dysfunction. Absolutely wonderful. Keep them coming. Hyperactivity, internal chaos. Very, very interesting. Do keep them coming. So, absolutely yes to many of these associations that are coming through around forgetfulness, impulsivity. I'm an ADHD. I can certainly relate to those experiences myself. I'm just going to get into the name for a moment and some of these key ideas that have come up because is ADHD actually an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? Let's break it down term by term. Is it an attention deficit? Absolutely not. ADHDers have a huge amount of attention, but we channel our focus through an interest-based nervous system. You will struggle to find anybody more attentive and motivated than an ADHDer who is in hyperfocus, and other neurodivergent people and people who are passionate about what they're doing. That's not just ADHDers, but it is a key aspect of ADHD. Is it hyperactive? Not necessarily. There are multiple different presentations of ADHD. You can have combined presentation, inattentive, which might manifest more as sort of distractedness, daydreaming. It can be more quiet and internal. It's typically more often how ADHD manifests in women and girls. So hyperactivity is just one of a whole spectrum of how it can show up. And is it a disorder? Well, some people think so, but many clinicians and researchers disagree. I disagree. I think it's a neurotype. It is a style. It is a thinking style, a feature of how our brains work. And I don't think it is necessarily one that has to be pathologized. We can be real about the enormous challenges that come with being ADHD in a neuronormative world, but I don't think that we have to frame it as being necessarily a negative. And Connor DeWolf, the YouTuber, has a really, I think, wonderful, creative, suggested reframing. He says, what if we renamed it Dave? Dopamine, attention, variability, executive dysfunction. It might just catch on. We'll see. So let's get into the heart of the presentation. What makes communication ADHD friendly? And I've phrased it this way rather than how do you communicate with your ADHD colleagues or friends? Because the thing is, many of us don't know that we are ADHDers. You don't need to have a diagnosis to be justified in identifying as ADHD. Diagnosis is not available to, frankly, that many of us around the world. And a lot of these practices are just going to be helpful for everybody, not just ADHDers. So I'd say it's good practice to be doing all of these things in general, and it might just help the ADHDers that you work with, and it might help them in other ways too. What I'm drawing from today when I give you these tips, these are little brief points taken out of a much more detailed and richer guide, which is available for free online. It's called the Ultimate ADHD Friendly Communication Guide. Got a screenshot from it on screen, and that's available at www.substack.fightingtalk.com. I'll share the link afterwards, but just so that you know where you can go to find that much more detailed resource, and you'll just get the bite-sized tips now. So let's get into 4 common features of ADHD, and I'm going to organize my tips and my recommendations around those features. So I'm going to put a phrase out into discussion here. Has anyone heard of time agnosia or time blindness? Have you heard of time blindness? The blind community has asked us to rephrase talking about it and call it time agnosia, which is like not being aware of time because, yeah, it's not the same as being blind. but you might know it by that name. Okay, so some of us, Anna, you're saying you've heard of it, others, not really. Yes. Anyone want to suggest what it is? Has it a little definition at what time blindness is or time agnosia is? What does it mean to experience time agnosia or time blindness? Absolutely. Not being aware of how long things take, can't judge how long something will take, no sense of time or limited sense of time. Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. Exactly that. So, if you are someone who experiences time agnosia, then it's really, really important that when you get instructions, they are specific. So, if I ask you to do something for me and I ask you to do it by the end of day, close of play, close of business, ASAP, as soon as possible, soonest, at your earliest convenience, this morning or whenever you can, one of the things that these phrases all have in common is they are non specific. They are quite vague. Some of them are even more vague than others. Close of play, for example, I would say is pretty inaccessible language because that is an idiom that is relatively common in British English. I don't know if people are saying that outside of the UK. Perhaps they are. Um, and they're ambiguous and it's just really not clear what they mean. Also, if we're literal thinkers, as many neurodivergent and particularly autistic people tend to be, then saying ASAP, soonest, or at your earliest convenience can mean that we think we have to drop everything and literally do a task right now, even if what that person actually meant was, could you do it as soon as possible without forgetting to eat, drink, or go to the bathroom? And it's important to note because lots of ADHDers are also autistic. There is a significant overlap in terms of those two neurotypes. And some researchers actually think that all ADHD is a subset of autism. So what we could say there is that there is likely to be quite a lot of overlap in terms of people taking phrases literally, whether they are autistic or ADHD or something else entirely. So what can we say instead of these rather vague but common phrases? Well, we could just say the exact time if there is an exact time, but be real about it. Let's not be making up deadlines and saying, I need this by 5:47. It is important that those deadlines are believable, credible, and authentic. So if you want to have them ready before you go into your 9 a.m. meeting, you could say that. You could say by Friday morning, again, a little bit ambiguous, but much better than ASAP, or make it clear what kind of action or event you're waiting on. So you might need it before the board meeting so that you can take those results in there. Make it clear to the other person at what time you actually need that piece of information, because it's going to make it way easier for them to know how to work on it, when to work on it. The what by when and why framework. This is actually, it's been really nicely expressed by Ellie Middleton, who's an autistic ADHDer, and she describes it this way. She says, say it with me, what by when, with clapping hands emojis in between each word for emphasis. What exactly do you need from me? When exactly do you need each of those things by? And bonus points for why. That last why, that's not just a nice to have. We know that many neurodivergent folks really struggle to do something if we are not given the reason why. I can identify with this personally. I'll have tasks that are sitting on my to-do list, which I feel utterly frozen, totally unable to do. Then when somebody tells me why they need it, it unlocks some sense of purpose and I feel like I can do it. It's also important to state the level of urgency. Now, this one links with that point about not saying ASAP or not defaulting to asking for things to being done right now unless they really need to be done as the top priority. And I think, again, it's just really good communications practice. So you could say non-urgent, not for action until tomorrow, or no action needed this week. Let's pick this back up again in a week. It's just really helpful to allow people to understand where something sits. And it really helps people who are less comfortable picking up on social cues, which again might be autistic people, but can be all of us. It can also help with cultural differences. People from different cultural backgrounds interpret requests really differently. So the more explicit you can be, the better. Give a specific deadline. Again, I would say that's just good task management. And now I'm going to move on to feature number 2 of ADHD, which typically shows up as attention differences, or what might have previously been called attention deficits. But as discussed, ADHDers don't lack attention, it's just channeled through an interest-based nervous system. So to help your attention struggling or attention challenged colleagues, it's really important to keep it short. By that, I mean, get straight to the point. What is the key message you're trying to communicate? Is it an ask? Are you informing somebody of something? Can you get straight into it? Obviously, if you feel like you need to include some nice pleasantries before a message because you would feel rude or you would be judged as being rude if you don't say, "Hi, hope you're well. Here's the request," then absolutely go for it. That might be necessary in your environment. It's more about once you've written your message, crafted your piece of information or request, then stripping out anything unnecessary. If in doubt, cut it out. You might have heard this phrase, don't bury the lead. It's a phrase that originated in newspaper newsrooms, and the lead in question is like the key idea in a newspaper story. And writers would be told, don't bury the lead. The most important part of this news story needs to be right at the beginning, and it must be right up there in the headline of the news story. And the way that we can apply that as people who are working in places that are not newsrooms is start with the key message. Very often, when you first write a message, your key idea will come out towards the end of the message as we build up to it. You can go back at the end and either move that right to the start or chop out some of the unnecessary filler, the possibly unnecessary context. Include a TLDR. Has anyone heard of a TLDR? Have you come across this phrase anywhere on the internet? Have you read one? What does it stand for? If you're familiar with it. Too long, didn't read. Thank you very much, Martha. Thank you, Maddie. Yeah, so a TLDR is a brief summary of what would be contained in a much bigger piece. So on screen, we've got a screenshot from an article about a topic I'll confess I don't find super fascinating, but it did have a nice, concise TLDR. It's about creating and managing Power Apps from Microsoft lists within Microsoft Teams. Honestly, I'm not going to read that piece, but I will read that quick TLDR right at the start. It's a 2-sentence summary up top for your person who doesn't have the time, the attention, or maybe is on a device that's about to lose battery, or is feeling unwell, or is experiencing menopause symptoms. It's going to help everybody, not just your ADHDers. I've also got a ton of recommendations around simple writing. That's also available via my Substack. I'll share the link with you afterwards for anyone who wants to access that for free. It sums up a ton of practical tips around how to lessen the cognitive load for your reader using short words, simple words, and other accessible writing best practices. 3, working memory. So your working memory is your short-term memory. You are using your working memory right now to follow along as I share information with you. In fact, as I'm speaking this sentence to you and I'm adding on more information through subordinate clauses, you're using your working memory to hold all of that in mind and to match it back up with the beginning of my sentence and to figure out where I started from and where I'm going. Full stop. I'll now finish that sentence. The point is, long sentences place more pressure on your working memory. Short sentences place less pressure on working memory. Many of us ADHDers really struggle with memory, remembering to do stuff. We've got a post here from ADHD Jessie saying, I take care of myself the same way I take care of plants. Not enough sunlight, often forget to water. So what can you do to help us? Send reminders. As standard, not in a patronizing passive aggressive way, whereby you only remind your colleagues who you think are ADHDers, but you don't remind other people. Just get in the practice of regular reminders, calendar invites, formal notices of anything that's going to happen. Schedule your meetings in advance. Avoid last minute changes. They can be enormously stressful, and ADHDers are more likely to forget about them or go to the wrong location or remember the previous information. And include buffer time in between tasks. All of us tend to struggle with transitions. Transitions are cognitively demanding, but they are particularly demanding for neurodivergent people. And aim for recurring times, dates, and places. Can you use the same Zoom link for your weekly meeting every time? Can you meet in the same place on Tuesdays at 11 a.m.? Not all the time, but if you can, do try and go for those recurring details. So make it the same each time. Make it bite size, and that applies to everything, whether it's a written message or an in-person conversation. Again, more tips on that in my free Substack, which you can feel free to explore. I'd summarize it all under this key point. If in doubt, cut it out. Do share a brief recap after meetings. If you have online meetings, you can use AI tools like Otter and Fathom, which do a brilliant job of summarizing what's been discussed and sharing action points. Repeat, repeat, repeat. And I'll repeat myself and say repetition is so powerful. Now, I want to talk briefly about emotional regulation, because this is another key issue for many ADHDers. And the solution, or the thing that helps many of us, is providing clarity and context. So, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD, describes when you feel rejection or criticism particularly keenly. Many neurodivergent people find criticism extra, especially painful and hard to deal with. So, give context around any conversations that you're scheduling, rather than saying important meeting, sending somebody an important meeting invite, saying that it's urgent and not explaining why. That could be really, really anxiety provoking for all of us, not just neurodivergent folks, but anyone who's even slightly anxious or worried. And rather than saying, can we have a quick chat without explaining what it means, you can just give that clearer context and say something like, hello, are you free at 1 p.m. for a short meeting about next month's marketing plan? Don't worry, it's nothing bad, promise. If you have any questions beforehand, just email me. And that's an example there from ADHD Works. Do give people processing time. Again, good communication practices for all of us. Rather than just asking somebody a question and expecting them to respond on the spot, you could say, I was wondering if you'd be interested in owning this project. Have a think and let me know by Friday at 5 p.m. So you're letting them reflect on their own time. I'll just skip through that example because it's the same point about giving people extra processing time. We've got a tweet here from Sarah Hass that says, oh, sorry, when I said I'm open to feedback, I meant you could give me a compliment. And that's really getting to the experience of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, whereby we feel very, very vulnerable when somebody gives us even well-intentioned criticism. It's not true of all ADHDers, but it is quite common among ADHDers. So if that's the case, do aim to praise in public, but give constructive criticism in private, where people can have a chance to regulate their emotions and recover from what might feel like a bit of an attack. So that brings us to the end of our very, very bite-sized introduction to ADHD-friendly communication there. Like I said, it's just a snapshot of a really rich and varied topic. I will send you to my ultimate ADHD-friendly communication guide if you want to get into that in more detail. It's available on Substack, and you'll find the link. I believe that Neve has kindly shared that in the chat already, so you can feel free to sign up and get more information there. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much. Yes, round of applause, everyone there. I think that was absolutely packed with a lot of information, and I saw a lot of people in the chat as well saying a lot of these things resonated with them. Maybe they need all of this. A lot of the time, this is not just good advice for working with people with ADHD. It's just good advice. We can all be forgetful, especially with the amount of notifications and things that we have. So I think everybody can agree. I see it very informative. We can agree that Ettie has a lot to share, a lot of good information, and we've shared their way to connect with Ettie on LinkedIn through her own website, Fighting Talk, and also with her 12-week program on inclusive and accessible communications as